Being able to move furniture and other items in the scene can really differentiate your walkthroughs from videos and still images, as well as real-time walkthroughs that don't have any of these options, providing easy to do and virtually unlimited customization for your intended viewers. For this part of the course, we're going to build a blueprint that allows us to pick up furniture with the press of a keyboard button or a gamepad controller. If you haven't learned the basics of Blueprint yet, it's definitely a good idea to do that before proceeding. It may seem a daunting task if you've never worked with Blueprint or used programming languages before, but don't worry, you can simply set this up once following along and then use it again and again throughout your walkthroughs. First, we need to make sure that our piece of movable furniture here is ready to go. So under the Details panel, we're going to scroll down to our Physics and Collision options. Under Physics, we want to simulate physics, so we'll enable that, and this allows it to begin to take advantage of the built-in physics system in Unreal. Under Collision, we want to set the collision preset to Physics Actor. Under this, we want to use CCD, or Continuous Collision Detection. Now we'll open our first-person character blueprint, so we'll go to Blueprints, Game Mode, Edit First-Person Game Mode, go down to our pawn, and edit that. We'll jump over to the viewport. And first we need to add a position for us to be able to grab the object. And this is where the object will be held. To do this, we need to add a couple of components. So we'll click the Add Component button. First of all, we need a physics handle. So we'll grab that. And we also need a scene component. So we can see our scene component is attached to the first person camera, and we'll just drag it to where we want the object that we pick up to be positioned when we pick it up. Now we need to create a ray tracing system that will look for objects in the world as we're moving around. We'll basically be firing a ray or drawing a line between our player and the objects in the world, and we'll use this to detect if we have a movable piece of furniture that we can pick up. So for this, we'll jump over to our event graph, and in Unreal it's called a line trace. So I'm going to right click and choose Line Trace by Channel. So again, we're going to be drawing our line from the camera. So we need to bring the camera into our blueprint here. So we'll just grab the camera and drag it in. From here, we need to get the location of the camera, and we need to find out what direction we're facing. So I'm going to pull off of the camera here, and then we're going to do a search for Get World Location. I'm going to pull off of the camera again and do a search for Get Forward Vector. Now the world location, we'll just go ahead and pull that into the input on start for our line trace. And this is where the line trace will start, at the first person camera. So we have the forward vector of our camera. What we're going to do is multiply this by, say, 200 centimeters. So we'll pull off of the return value here, do a search for float vector, and we'll put in our value here of 200. Just going to move this over a little bit so we can see more of the blueprint space. So now we want to add this value of 200 to the world location of the camera. So we'll use a vector addition node for that. So we'll pull off of the camera here and do a search for vector plus vector. There we go. And then we'll pipe this into the second input. And now we can apply this to the end of our line trace. We accidentally used subtract, but what we really wanted to do here was multiply. So let's go ahead and delete this node. We'll right click and choose float times vector. There we go. Vector times float it is. Now we can drag our return value into this. We'll set this back to 200. And then we'll take the return value from this and pipe it into our add node. Now we want to make sure that our scene component is parented to the camera. So we'll drag it onto first person camera, and then we'll rename this to something a little more descriptive. We'll call it the held object loc. Now we need to add the blueprints for being able to grab an object or pick it up and to drop it as well. And we also need to set up the input events. Let's start with our grab object node network. We're going to need our physics handle for this. So we'll drop it into the scene, and we're going to use grab component off of this one. So you pull off of the output and type grab component. And the actual name of the node is grab component at location. While we're at it, we might as well start setting up the release component as well. We'll grab our physics handle again from our component list, drag it into the scene. This time we're going to create a release component. And we can leave these here for now. We're going to go back up to our line trace, And off of here, we're going to pull out of the output of our line trace and go to a branch. We're going to use the out-hit output off of our line trace, and we're going to drag this to a break hit result. So this is going to get the result of our line trace if it hits something. From here, we'll grab from the hit component, and out of there, we're going to need to test if that component is simulating physics. So is simulating physics. Remember, we enabled simulating physics in our movable object. So our return value will tie into another branch. So the condition is testing whether or not the object is simulated. And then we'll tie the branch off of our line tracer into this branch as well, continuing the chain of our line trace. And finally here, we want to pull off of the return value of our line trace and put it into the condition of the first branch. Okay, we need to bring up our grab component. And so if the object is simulating and we've touched it with our line trace, we'll tie this into our grab component at location. We need to fill in the component input there, and we'll just bring that off of our hit component. So that would be the furniture that we're touching with the line trace. We'll grab that and pull it into the component input here. And next we need to get the grab location. So once again, we're going to pull off of the hit component, and we need to get the world location. So get world location. And in the return value of our world location, we'll go here into the grab location. Now we want to keep track of whether or not we're holding an object. Remember, we don't want to be able to pick up multiple objects. So we need to create a new variable. Under the variables category here on the left, we'll click new variable, and we'll call this B holding object. Now we can drag that variable into our blueprint here, and we're going to set it to set B holding object. And then off of our grab component, we'll tie that into the set holding object and make sure we check holding object. Now we also need to know when we've released the object, so we'll go back down to our release component. We'll pull the variable into the scene again, and this time using set B holding object, we'll uncheck holding object. We next need to add some input, so when the user or the viewer presses a key on the keyboard, he can pick the object up. So we'll go into our project settings and then go under Engine Input. And here we need to add a new action mapping, and we're going to call this Grab Object. We'll click on the drop down, we'll open up Keyboard, and we'll use the E key. So we'll scroll down till we can find E. Okay, so we need to jump back over to our blueprint. All right, so we're going to go ahead and add our E key in here. So we'll right click and choose E key. And that'll allow us to find the E key very quickly. Now we need a custom event, so we'll choose custom event. We're going to name this custom event pick up object. We need another custom event, and we'll name this one drop object. Pick up object, we want to tie that into our line tracer, so we'll go ahead and drag that up here to the line tracer and take the output into the input of the line tracer. So now our line tracer will only fire when the pickup object event happens. Now we want to take the drop object event and we want to tie that one into our release component node. So we'll drag it here and then from the output into the input of release component. So our release component will only happen once we have detected the drop object event. When we press the E key, this is where we're going to test for whether or not we're already holding an object. So we need our B holding object variable. So let's drop that into the scene. And in this case, we're going to do a get B holding object. So we'll need a branch to test whether or not we're holding the object when we press the E key. So pulling off of the pressed on E, we'll do a search for branch, drop that in. The condition, of course, is holding object. So if it's true, if we are holding an object, we want to fire off the drop object function. If it's false, we want to fire off the pick up object function. So now we know if we're holding the object to drop it, and if we're not holding it to pick it up. So now we need to be updating the location of our physics object every tick of the game. We're going to drag in our physics handle again. And we also need to drag in the held object location. Remember, this is the scene component that we created and added to our first-person camera, and this is where the object will be in front of us as we're holding it. So we'll need to set the target location of the object, so pulling off of the physics handle, we'll do a search for set target location. And for the location, we'll need to get the world location of that object. So we'll pull off of held object location and of course do a search for get world location. And then the return value just needs to go into our new location. Now we want this to happen every tick of the scene. So we're going to right click and we'll choose event tick. We're just going to pull off of the output of our event tick and tie it into the input of our set target location. So every tick of the scene as it's running in real time will be updating the location of the held object. Okay, and that should be it. So we can go ahead and compile our scene. Looks like our compile was successful. So now let's give it a test. So let's look at our piece of furniture here and pick it up. There we go. We can pick it up now. It did kind of pick up funny. It's a little bit too jiggly and rotates as I move around. So we can fix that by tweaking a few settings on the object itself. You want your furniture to stay in the same rotation axis so that it'll be easy to put back down. So we're going to lock all axes here, X, Y, and Z. Let's go ahead and try that. All right, we'll pick up the furniture. So now we have a nice unrotating piece of furniture that we can move around the scene. It collides with everything else. And then let's see if we can drop it now. Perfect. There are many different ways we could have achieved similar results in Unreal. Blueprint is virtually limitless in the types of techniques you can use to do things. This particular technique I got off of the Unreal community, and that's a great example of how you can go into the wiki and the YouTube channels and find tons of information on how to do these things, not just from the Unreal developers and the people who work at Epic, but also from the community, which is huge. So a big thanks to the community for this technique. Being able to move things around is great, but what if we want our viewer to be able to change the paint color on the wall or choose a different pattern of hardwood flooring? Blueprint gives us that ability as well using material instances, and we'll cover that next.